The wedding hall glowed with golden chandeliers, its glass doors wide open to welcome guests in gowns and tuxedos. Inside, music, swelled laughter rose, and the clinking of glasses rang out like bells of celebration. But outside, just a few steps away from the grandeur, an old woman sat hunched on a hard wooden chair, her frail hands folded tightly in her lap. She wasn't a stranger, she wasn't a servant, she wasn't a passerby who had wandered in by mistake. She was the grandmother of the groom, the woman who had raised him, carried him in her arms when his parents were too busy, and prayed for him when he fell sick as a child. Yet tonight, at the most important day of his life, she was hidden away, pushed outside the hall like an inconvenience to be forgotten. The cold marble floor pressed through her thin shoes. Each laugh that drifted from the hall stabbed her heart with the reminder that she was excluded, erased from the picture, perfect family portrait. Grandmother, they had called her sweetly for years when they needed her money, her time, her blessings. But tonight she was not grandmother. She was simply the burden they wanted out of sight. No one spoke to her as they passed. The guests draped in silk and diamonds glanced at her briefly, but quickly looked away as though her presence was an embarrassment they were instructed to ignore. She heard whispers, the kind that sting more than open insults. Why is she sitting there? Didn't they have a proper seat for her? Maybe it's her choice. The word nearly made her laugh, though her throat was too tight to release the sound. She hadn't chosen this. She hadn't chosen to sit outside listening to her family celebrate as though she had already died and been buried. The night air grew colder, but her chest burned hotter with each passing minute. She remembered the moment it happened, still sharp in her memory, despite the blur of emotions. She had walked into these. Her hands trembling with joy, dressed in the simple silk sari she had saved for years, for this very occasion. She expected smiles, open arms, perhaps even a proud introduction. This is my grandmother, the woman who raised me. But instead, her daughter-in-law's hand had landed firmly on her shoulder. Please, Amma, she had whispered. Her lips stretched in a fake smile for the watching guests. Sit outside. There are too many people in here and we don't want confusion. Confusion as though her very existence could ruin their carefully arranged seating plan, as though her face aged with wrinkles might not fit the curated photographs they wanted to post on social media tomorrow. So here she was, on the other side of the glass doors, present yet invisible, her eyes blurred as she tried to blink away the tears, but her ears caught everything. She heard the priest's chants echoing the applause when the groom tied the sacred thread, the loud cheer when the bride and groom exchanged garlands. She imagined her grandson's smile, the one she used to see every morning when he ran to her kitchen for the sweet rice she made just for him. She wondered if he even noticed her absence, or worse, if he noticed and didn't care. But what they didn't know, what nobody in that glittering hall knew, was that she had heard something they never intended her to hear. As she sat outside, invisible and discarded, two voices carried clearly through the half-open service door near her chair. Familiar voices, her son and his wife, their words sliced through her like a knife. She's too old, her daughter-in-law hissed. If she sits inside, she'll start talking. You know how she is always telling stories, always bringing up the past. Tonight is not about her, it's about us. The last thing we need is her opening her mouth and spoiling everything. Her son's reply was even colder. It doesn't matter. She won't say anything. She doesn't have the courage. She'll sit quietly like she always does. Her hands clenched. They thought she was weak. They thought her silence was submission. They thought she no longer had a voice, but they were wrong. That night, before the last toast was raised and before the final song was played, everyone in that hall would hear her voice. They would hear the truth that had been buried for too long, the truth her son had tried to keep hidden, the truth her daughter-in-law feared more than anything else. For years she had carried it in her heart, waiting for the right moment. Now, as she sat in the shadows of the very family she had built, she realized that moment had come. And when it did, it would not just be a wedding, it would be a reckoning. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when her name meant something inside this family, a time when her voice was the one everyone waited to hear her blessings, the ones that sealed every milestone her hands, the ones that cooked, cared, and carried the weight of the household. Long before the glittering chandeliers and rented banquet halls, there was only a small brick house with leaking roofs and creaking doors. Back then, money was scarce, luxuries were dreams, and survival was a daily struggle. Yet in those years, when her children were still small and her husband worked himself to exhaustion, she became the invisible pillar holding it all together. She remembered those nights, the long ones, where she would stay awake stitching clothes under the faint glow of a kerosene lamp, her fingers pricked and sore just to earn enough for her children's school books. She remembered the mornings rising before dawn to prepare rice and lentils, making sure every little stomach was filled before sending them off to school. She remembered the festivals when she would trade her own gold bangles for sweets and new clothes for the children while she herself wore the same old sari year after year. Her husband had passed away early, leaving her with too much responsibility and too little help. But she never complained. Her children were her pride, her reason for enduring the hunger, the loneliness too. He ate of sacrifice among all her children. It was her eldest son now, the father of the groom whom she trusted the most. He was the one she believed would stand by her in old age, the one who promised with tearful eyes after his father's funeral, "Don't worry, Amma. I'll take care of you always." And for many years it seemed he meant it. When he got married, he would bring his wife to her for advice. When he had children, he would hand them over to her with relief, letting her rock them to sleep, soothe their fevers, and tell them stories. She was more than just a grandmother. She was a second mother. Her grandson, the groom, whose wedding she was now barred from, had been her shadow in those early years. She could still see his small hands tugging at her sari, hear his voice asking for sweets, feel the warmth of his little body when he curled into her lap to nap. He had loved her with a purity only children possess, untainted by pride or shame. She thought that love would last forever, but years have a way of eroding bonds, especially when money, pride, and ambition seep in. Slowly the house grew bigger. Her son's business flourished. They moved from the modest neighborhood to a grand villa with polished floors and tall gates. With every step upward in wealth, it seemed they left a little piece of her behind. At first the changes were small. Her daughter-in-law no longer sought her advice, instead rolling her eyes when she offered it. Her son, once eager to share his struggles with her, began to brush off her questions with curt replies. "Don't worry about it, Amma. You won't understand." Then came the bigger shifts. Family meals that once centered around her cooking were now catered dinners where she was a quiet guest instead of the host. Decisions about the children's education, weddings, or careers were made without her input. She was no longer consulted, no longer needed, except when tradition demanded her presence. It was during these years that she began to notice the whispers, the way her daughter-in-law would speak about her in hushed tones, as though she were a nuisance, the way her son would sigh when she asked too many questions, the way her grandchildren, growing older, began to mirror their parents' distance. Still, she held on to hope. She told herself it was just the way of modern families, that respect often hides beneath silence, that her love would still matter in the end. And in some ways, she was right. On birthdays, her grandson would still touch her feet for blessings. On festivals, he would still run to her room first to collect the sweets she secretly saved for him. His love was her last thread of belonging. But now at his wedding, even that thread seemed severed. As she sat outside the hall, the memories stabbed at her with cruel irony. She had dreamed of this day, not to be a guest in the corner, but to walk proudly, holding his hand, introducing herself as the grandmother who had once raised him. She had imagined giving her blessings at the mandap, her wrinkled hand pressed against his bowed head. She had saved for years, not in money, but in prayers for his happiness. And now she was nothing more than a shadow at the edge of his celebration. But the truth was, it wasn't just neglect that placed her here. It wasn't just pride or arrogance. It was fear. Because buried in her heart and folded in the letter she still carried in her purse was a truth about this family that could tear down everything they had built. Her son knew it. Her daughter-in-law feared it. And both of them believed that keeping her outside, silencing her voice, would keep that truth hidden. As the music inside swelled and the celebrations reached their peak, she leaned back against the cold wall, closing her eyes. The past and present blurred together, her sacrifices, their betrayal, her silence, their arrogance. They thought they had buried her story. But stories have a way of clawing their way to the surface. And tonight, when the candles burned low and the guests settled into comfort, the story she had carried for decades would finally break free. It wasn't revenge she sought. It wasn't even recognition. It was justice for her husband, for herself, and even for the grandson who unknowingly stood at the center of it all. This was no longer just a wedding. It was the stage for the truth. The wedding hall roared with joy, 100 voices rising in celebration. Glasses clinked, drums echoed, and the bride's laughter rang like silver bells. But outside in the cold corridor, her world was deathly still. She sat on her chair, hands knotted in her lap, trying to convince herself to endure a few more hours of humiliation before she could finally retreat to the safety of her small room at home. But fate had other plans. It began quietly, almost by accident. She leaned forward, adjusting her shawl, when she heard voices drifting from the side service door that connected the hall to the catering area. The sound was faint but distinct enough for her to recognize her son's voice. At first she thought nothing of it. He was likely giving instructions, perhaps scolding a waiter, but then she heard his tone, sharp, urgent, hushed, and her chest tightened. She tilted her head slightly, the way one does when trying to catch a half-whisper. "Make sure it's locked," her son said. A pause, then her daughter-in-law's voice followed, laced with irritation. "I told you already, the key is with me. No one else has access." Her heart skipped. Key locked. What were they talking about? Her son's voice dropped even lower. "Good, because if anyone sees what's inside, everything we've built will be ruined. Do you understand? Everything." The grandmother froze. Her pulse quickened. What were they hiding? She pressed her wrinkled hand against the wall, steadying herself as her ears strained for every word. Her daughter-in-law let out a nervous laugh. "You worry too much. Who's going to find out? She's outside, isn't she? What can that old woman do? She doesn't even have the strength to open her mouth and—" More. Her breath caught. They were talking about her. The silence between the two was broken only by the faint music from the hall. Then her son spoke again, his words cold and sharp. "Don't underestimate her. If she says anything about the past, if she shows that letter—" Her hands trembled. The letter, he knew she still had it. "Then it's over," he continued. "No business partners, no respect, no inheritance. We'll be finished," her daughter-in-law hissed. "Then we make sure she never speaks. Tonight is about appearances. Once this wedding is over, we'll send her away somewhere far, maybe even to that old age home we discussed." Her world spun. Her own son, her flesh and blood, planning to throw her away like refuse once the celebrations ended. She pressed a hand against her chest, forcing herself to breathe quietly, afraid they might hear her from the corridor. But their words only grew sharper, more venomous. "She's lived long enough," her daughter-in-law muttered. "She served her purpose. We don't owe her anything anymore." And then came the words that cut deeper than any knife. Her son replied almost casually, She should have died when Father did, would have saved us all this trouble. Her vision blurred. The tears she had tried so hard to hold back now spilled freely down her wrinkled cheeks. She had sacrificed her life for him, for this ungrateful child, and this was what he truly thought of her, that her life was nothing but trouble. Her mind swirled, but amidst the pain, one thought rose clear as fire: the truth. They're hiding the truth. She knew what they feared. She knew what was locked away, and she knew she was the only one who could reveal it. For years she had carried her late husband's words close to her heart, sealed in that old envelope, a confession he had written before his death. Words that explained everything. She had never dared to show it, never dared to shake the fragile balance of her son's growing empire. She had convinced herself it was best left hidden, that silence was safer than confrontation. But tonight, as she sat in the shadows of her grandson's wedding, she realized silence. He had only made her invisible. Her son had underestimated her, but so had she. She wasn't weak, she wasn't voiceless. She was the keeper of the one truth that could shatter the lies they were building their lives upon. Her grip tightened on her small handbag where the letter lay, hidden beneath a folded handkerchief. She had carried it for years, never fully understanding why she couldn't let it go. Now she knew why. This moment, this night. Inside the hall, the music swelled louder, and the bride and groom took to the floor for their first dance. The guests cheered, oblivious to the storm brewing just outside their golden-lit paradise. The grandmother slowly straightened her back. For the first time that night, she no longer felt like a discarded shadow. She felt like a witness, no more than that. She was the torchbearer of truth. She wiped her tears, her eyes narrowing with quiet resolve. They thought they had locked the truth away. They thought they could silence her with humiliation, with distance, with threats. But they were wrong. As she stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor, a strange calm washed over her. She would not wait for permission. She would not sit outside while her family's sins poisoned the very air of her grandson's wedding. Tonight she would open her mouth, tonight she would speak, and when she did, every soul in that glittering hall would hear what they had tried so desperately to bury. This was no longer just a celebration. It was about to become an unveiling. The music thundered on inside, but the old woman's heartbeat drowned it out. She pressed her hand firmly on her handbag, fingers trembling as they brushed against the familiar shape of the folded envelope hidden within. For years she had carried it, at funerals, at festivals, at birthdays. It was more than paper and ink. It was her husband's voice, preserved across time, a voice she hadn't heard since the day he closed his eyes. For the last time, the letter. She had never shown it to anyone, not her children, not her friends, not even the priest who blessed her after his death. She had read it only once on the night. She found it tucked inside his old trunk, written in a handwriting weakened by illness, but still undeniably his. That night she had wept until dawn, torn between love and betrayal, between the comfort of his honesty and the weight of the burden he had left her with. In the years that followed, she told herself it was better hidden, that some truths only destroyed and families needed harmony more than honesty. But tonight, after hearing her son spit venom, after realizing they would erase her existence the way one erases chalk from a board, she knew silence was no longer kindness, it was cowardice. Her hands shook as she reached into her bag. Slowly, carefully, she pulled out the envelope. Its edges yellowed with time, the ink slightly smudged, but still strong enough to pierce through memory. On the front was her name written the way only he wrote it, with care, with reverence, as though even her name deserved respect. She hesitated, her breath caught in her throat. Could she really do this? Could she tear open the one secret that might burn everything down? Her husband's voice echoed in her mind. The truth, no matter how late, is still the truth. With a trembling sigh, she opened it. The letter wasn't polished. It wasn't poetic. It was raw, the kind of words a man writes when time is running out and regrets claw louder than pride. My dearest, if you are reading this, it means my body has given up before my soul was ready, and I cannot leave without telling you what I've hidden all these years. I built this house for us with sweat, but not all of it was mine. Some of it came from dishonest means, deals made in the shadows, papers signed in haste, money taken that was never mine to keep. I told myself it was for you, for our children, for the life I wanted to give them. But greed is a silent poison, and it has poisoned me. If I die with this secret, our children will grow proud of a legacy that is not clean. They will inherit not just my land and money, but my sins. I do not ask you to forgive me. I only ask you to tell them the truth one day when the time is right. If they choose to correct my wrongs, then perhaps my soul will rest lighter. If they choose to hide it, then at least they will do so knowingly, not in ignorance. Do not let them build their lives on a lie. Do not let my son, especially him, believe that all his wealth is pure, because one day lies collapse, and when they do, they bury not just the guilty, but everyone standing nearby. I leave this burden with you because you are stronger than I ever was. You will know when the time has come. Yours always are. Her chest heaved. Even after all these years, the words still cut deep. The husband she had loved had not been the flawless man she had once believed. He had carried sins, choices that had stained their family's future. And yet, reading his words again, she realized something else. He had trusted her. He had left her not with guilt, but with responsibility. He had believed she was strong enough to one day hold this truth and wield it with courage. And that day had come. Her son's arrogance, his wife's cruelty, the coldness of the family, they were all built upon the wealth of lies her husband confessed to. Her son had not only inherited the money, he had inherited the blindness to think it would never catch up with him, but tonight it would. She folded the letter gently, her hand steadier now than when she first pulled it out. No more trembling, no more silence. For the first time in years, she felt her husband's presence not as guilt, but as strength flowing through her veins. A sudden cheer erupted inside the hall. The toast had begun. Her grandson was on stage, smiling nervously beside his bride as his father. Her son raised a glass to the guests, to family, to legacy, and to a future built on love. The words struck her like lightning. Legacy built on love. No, built on lie. She rose to her feet, slowly, deliberately, the letter clutched tightly in her palm. The time had come. She pushed the glass doors open. The light of the chandeliers spilled onto her frail figure, and the chatter in the hall softened as heads turned. Her son froze mid-toast, his smile faltering, the color draining from his face. "Amma," he muttered, his voice breaking. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on him. Her voice, though aged, carried across the hall. "Stop," she said. "Stop celebrating a legacy built on lies. Tonight the truth will speak." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her grandson's smile vanished. Confusion flooding his face as he looked from his father to his grandmother. She raised the letter for all to see, the envelope trembling only from age, not from fear. "This," she declared, "is the truth your father tried to bury, and I will not let it die with me." The hall fell into stunned silence. Her son's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. His wife's eyes widened in horror, and for the first time that night the grandmother felt tall, not frail, not invisible, but tall as though every sacrifice, every humiliation, every wound she had endured had led to this moment. The letter burned in her hand, not as a weight, but as a torch, and tonight she was ready to set the darkness ablaze. The letter trembled in the groom's hands as he unfolded it, his eyes darting nervously between the fragile handwriting and the tense faces around him. The hall was so silent that even the faint rustle of paper sounded like thunder. Every guest leaned forward, their breath caught in anticipation. Her son, his father snapped suddenly, his voice harsh and desperate. Don't read it. It's lies. All of it. Just words from an old man losing his mind. The grandmother's voice, though frail, cut through the hall like a blade. No, it is truth written by a man who knew his time was short. He wanted his grandson to know what kind of blood runs in his veins. The groom swallowed hard, the paper shaking in his hands. The bride placed her hand over his, whispering softly, "It's okay, read it." His father's face turned crimson. "Don't listen to." "Oh, her. This is my family now, my empire. She has no say." The grandmother straightened, her spine stiff despite her age. Her voice trembled, but each word carried steel. "You don't understand what he left behind, and I won't let you destroy it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The groom's voice cracked as he spoke. "What did he leave behind?" The grandmother turned her gaze on her son, eyes blazing with years of suppressed pain. "Tell him, tell your son the truth you've buried for decades." But her son's lips pressed into a thin, defiant line. Instead of confessing, he sneered, "The truth. The truth is that I built this family into something worth respecting. I gave you all this wealth, this name, this grandeur. Without me, you'd be nothing but a forgotten old woman in a broken house." The grandmother's hands clenched into fists. She stepped closer, her frailty suddenly gone, replaced with a righteous fury that startled everyone. "You dare speak of respect when everything you own is drenched in deceit. When your father confessed enough," he roared, his voice echoing off the marble walls. His fist slammed against the banquet table, sending glasses crashing to the floor. Guests flinched, whispers rising louder now, the scandal spreading like wildfire through the crowd. The groom's jaw tightened as he looked from his grandmother to his father. His heart pounded in his chest. "Papa," he whispered, his voice shaking, "is it true? Did Dada cheat, steal everything?" His father's eyes darted wildly, his mask of control slipping. "No, it was survival. We did what we had to do, and now we are kings because of it." The grandmother's voice, quiet but unyielding, pierced through the chaos. "Kings built on sand, and the tide is here." Gasps echoed through the hall. The bride's father shifted uneasily, his gaze narrowing at the groom's father. Alliances were beginning to crumble, trust evaporating like mist. The son, cornered, exposed, snarled, his desperation givey. Nengway to rage. He turned on his mother, his finger stabbing the air between them. "You will not ruin me, not here, not tonight." The grandmother's lips trembled, but her words were sharp as glass. "I am not ruining you. You ruined yourself the day you chose pride over integrity." And then the inevitable explosion. Her son lunged toward her, his face twisted with fury, his hand raised. The crowd gasped. Some stood, some cried out, but before the blow could land, the groom seized his father's wrist. The hall fell into stunned silence. The young man's grip was firm, his eyes blazing with something his father had never seen before: defiance. "No," the groom said, his voice low but steady. "You don't get to hurt her, not anymore." The father's arm trembled, caught in his son's grip. For a moment it looked as though he might resist, but the strength in his son's hold and the fire in his gaze broke something inside him. His arm fell limp. The grandmother's eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of relief. She whispered, "Thank you." The groom turned to face his father fully, now his voice rising for the entire hall to hear. "All my life I looked up to you. I thought you were a man of strength, of honor. But tonight I see the truth. You're afraid. Afraid of her words. Afraid of what this letter says. Afraid of your own father's confession." The father's lips quivered, his eyes darting across the judgmental faces surrounding him. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The grandmother placed her trembling hand on her grandson's shoulder, her voice firm but gentle. You carry his name, but you don't have to carry his sins. Choose differently. Be the man he hoped you would be in this letter. The groom looked down at the faded ink, then back at his grandmother. His throat tightened. I will, he whispered. I promise. The father's knees buckled slightly. The empire he had built, the image he had polished, the power he wielded, it was all slipping through his fingers, undone not by enemies, but by his own mother and son. Guests rose from their seats, buzzing with shock and scandal. Some recorded on their phones, others shook their heads in disbelief. The bride said, Dee's family whispered urgently, already questioning if they had tied their daughter to a cursed lineage. The father staggered back a step. His chest heaving, he tried one last time, his voice cracking. You don't understand everything I did. I did for you. The groom's eyes glistened, but his voice was unyielding. No, you did it for yourself, and tonight the lies end. The grandmother's face softened, her shoulders sagging as though the weight she had carried for decades was finally being lifted. For the first time, her son, the man who had once been her pride, her shame, her burden, looked small, not powerful, not feared, just a broken man trapped in the ruins of his own making. The confrontation had shattered the facade. What came next? Redemption or ruin would depend on how the truth was embraced, and as the groom clutched the letter to his chest, the grandmother knew the storm was finally breaking, but the aftermath would decide the fate of them all. For a long moment no one moved. The letter hung in the groom's hands, fragile yet heavy enough to crush the empire his father had built. The chandeliers flickered above their golden light, glinting off eyes wide with judgment, curiosity, and fear. The grandmother stood steady, her frail figure glowing with quiet triumph. She had spoken, she had fought, and now she waited for her grandson to decide what kind of man he would become. The groom's chest rose and fell as he read the final lines aloud, his voice breaking. If my son continues down this path, he will inherit nothing but curses. But if my grandson reads these words, may he choose differently. May he cleanse the family name I have stained. The hall fell into stunned silence. His father staggered forward, his face pale, his lips trembling. That's not what he meant, he whispered, desperation thick in his voice. Dying men say foolish things you can't, but his words died on his tongue. His son, the boy he had once carried on his shoulders. The man now standing taller than him looked at him with eyes full of grief and fire. No more lies, the groom said, his voice ringing with finality. You've had your chance to explain. And all you've shown me is fear. The grandmother's hand shook as she reached for her grandson. You must decide now, she said softly. Do we bury this truth like your father wants, or do we face it and let the world judge us? The weight of her words pressed down on him. He looked around at the guests, whispering, recording, judging, at his bride who clutched his arm with fear, but also silent support, at his mother whose eyes darted between husband and son, torn by loyalty, and then finally at his father. The groom took a deep breath. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. We face it. Tonight we end this cycle. If we lose everything, at least we will have truth. The hall erupted, gasps, whispers, some voices of approval, others of horror. The bride's father stood, his expression sharp, calculating. If this is true, then this family's name is tainted. How can I let my daughter? But before he could finish, the bride herself rose, her voice shaking but strong. I chose him, not his father's sins, and I will stand with him. Her words cut through the hall like light-piercing darkness. Guests turned stunned as whispers turned to applause. Some clapped in respect for the young couple's courage, others in awe of the grandmother's revelation. Her son, however, fell to his knees. His face was a mask of devastation, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. For the first time in decades, he looked not like the powerful patriarch he pretended to be, but like the lost boy he once was. "I did it for you," he whispered. "Broken. I wanted you to never suffer as I did. I wanted you to have more. I thought if I could be strong, if I could build something, you would be proud of me." The grandmother's heart twisted. Tears filled her eyes. "I was proud," she said softly. "Proud of the boy you once were, but not of the man you became." And now she looked at her grandson, her voice firm again. "He has the chance to rebuild what you destroyed." The groom reached out his hand, hovering in the air between them. His father stared at it, torn between shame and longing. For a moment the hall held its breath, waiting, and then the father crumbled. He reached out, clutching his son's hand, tears streaming freely down his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he choked out the words, breaking after years of silence. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm sorry." The grandmother closed her eyes, the tears spilling over her wrinkled cheeks. For the first time in decades, she felt the chains of silence shatter. The groom bent down, helping his father to his feet. His voice was firm but gentle. "This doesn't erase what you've done, but if you mean those words, if you truly regret it, then we'll build something new together. Not with lies, not with stolen pride, with honesty." The hall erupted again, this time with mixed voices. Some mocked, others praised, but it no longer mattered. The family had chosen truth, and in that truth they found a strange kind of redemption. The grandmother, her body trembling with exhaustion, allowed herself a small smile. She leaned on her cane, whispering to herself, "At last the curse is broken." Her son lowered his head no longer, the towering figure he once portrayed, and her grandson, her legacy, stood tall, letter still clutched in his hand, his bride's hand in the other. He was not just the heir of an empire, but the builder of a new beginning. For the first time that night, silence filled the hall, not heavy, not hostile, but cleansing. And in that silence, the grandmother realized something she had not been hidden away at her grandson's wedding. She had been placed exactly where she needed to be, at the heart of truth, carrying the voice of the past into the future. As the music hesitantly began again and guests shuffled between shame and celebration, she whispered to her late husband in her heart, "They will not repeat your sins tonight. The truth became our redemption."